Thank you, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Breaking Into Cybersecurity. But today we have a special edition. With everything happening in the world, I thought that it would be helpful to have someone come on and talk about some of the things that we could be seeing in social media. And as we talk about social media as one of the ways to get into the industry, I wanted to bring on John to talk about misinformation within social media and potentially how we can identify that. But before we get there, if you're on LinkedIn, please ensure that you follow myself and John. If you are on YouTube, make sure you hit subscribe and then that notification button. And if you're following us after the fact on podcast, share it with all your friends and family. We love to have you in cyber. So John, how did you get into misinformation and how would you define it?
Sure. So I've had a long career in it. I began at the JFK Special Warfare Center in school as a psychological operations specialist in 2006. I was a tactical soldier in Iraq in 2008. I was the chief counter-propaganda analyst for United States Forces Iraq out of the Palace in Baghdad in 2010. I was the atmospherics manager for Kandahar in 2011. And then I was the liaison officer for the atmospherics program to Combined Joint Psychological Operations Task Force and pretty much all of ISAF in Afghanistan in 2012. Then I was the director of cybersecurity at Flashpoint from 2013 to 2015. I've been an independent security contractor working on this and other cyber issues since.
Wow. So you mentioned a couple big words, and we want to make sure that our audience can understand. You mentioned psychological warfare. What is psychological warfare?
Psychological warfare it's currently called PSYOP, Psychological Operations, or MISO, Military Information Support Operations, depending on which generation you come from. Psychological warfare was one of the original names. It's not necessarily the original, but people from the Vietnam era will understand it. And psychological warfare is easy not to confuse with the psychologist. So psychological warfare is just easy for people. People hear about it as PSYOPs as well. But the mission statement for psychological operations for the U.S. is to persuade, change, and influence the hearts and minds of foreign nationals to meet U.S. objectives.
Okay. So how does one go about doing that?
There's a 7-step PSYOP process, and this is fairly uniform across NATO countries. The process involves understanding what sort of missions that the Secretary of Defense or the President all the way up, what does the commander want? It all starts with the commander's intent. Oftentimes that might be to get the Iraqi people to not blow us up is a relatively simple one. Or if you're Russian and you want to, say, influence the 2016 elections, it might be to create distrust the U.S. electoral process, to disrupt and degrade Hillary Clinton's ability to govern, and to promote Donald Trump should he win.
Interesting. So you mentioned like to promote distrust and lose faith in a system. How does one go about doing that?
Sure. So first, the way that those missions come down, those objectives are decided by leadership. Those are the civilian leaders that figure out what those are. How that happens, there's a seven-step PSYOP process. So you initially start by figuring out who your potential target audiences might be, who can actually do the thing that the leader wants you to do. Telling a bunch of Iraqi women to lay down arms is probably not super useful. But telling military age males ages 16 to 25 to do so, you might get a little more bang for your military dollar. So you start by identifying who the target audiences who can achieve the objective might be. Then you move into what's called target audience analysis. And this looks quite a bit like market research. Very much PSYOP and marketing have some of their original basis in Edward Bernays' book Propaganda way back when. I think it was the 50s or 60s. So you're going to see a lot of the same things, just with slightly different terms. You do your market analysis on your target audiences. Once you have an idea of all the conditions and vulnerabilities that affect target audience, you start drilling in on lines of persuasion that might influence them to do something. Say you want to influence a group of Iraqis to report on IEDs in their neighborhood. And you're discussing it with the females in the area, the moms and dads, the moms particularly because they're at home all day and are more apt to see people laying IEDs in their neighborhood. So these are the people that we're targeting. these are the conditions that we really have to get to know the target audience in order to understand. Then we find a line of persuasion that would really tug specifically at the conditions and vulnerabilities that affect them. If we're speaking about the mothers of Iraq, it's a good chance that they have a strong concern for their kids. IEDs are dangerous for everybody. So maybe we can, as a line of persuasion, your children would be safe if you were to do this. Now, that's a very general idea, but you also have you look at appeals and techniques on top of that. So your glittering generalities, your less of worse evils, best of two evils, sorts of situations to move from there. And then you develop the best methods to discuss, to deliver that line of persuasion to the target audience. So to continue with the example we were using, a lot of Iraqi females were illiterate. So pamphlets with a bunch of words on them don't do so hot. Pictures might do a lot better. Or if they have radios, maybe a radio message. Maybe they have access to TV. What TV do they watch? All of this is part of that initial research into the target audience. What is the best method to get that line of persuasion into their hands? So once we have the line of persuasion, once we've done our due diligence on who these people are, then we start generating the product in order to communicate this message to them. Be it a radio ad, be it a book, maybe it's a speech from a key leader who agrees with our line of persuasion and disagrees with the Taliban. Or in the case of the Russians, maybe it might be having a trusted American say it as opposed to having some heavily accented Russian dude coming at you from the Internet Research Agency.
So this approach sounds like a lot like social engineering. Could one just call it social engineering in a way?
Sure. There's not a lot different between what a psychological operations specialist does and what a research team does. The Internet Research Agency could just as well be a marketing firm, but they decided to put their hat towards evil, and here's where we are.
Okay, so that's the process about figuring out who you want to target. How do you specifically now seed misinformation into the social media process? Because like you were just talking about sharing information. How do we tilt that to misinformation now?
Well, there's tons of different. So the worst, it's kind of the principal role. One of the big kind of rules of PSYOP is to do your best never to lie. I might selectively exclude information so that the target audience is more likely to believe what I want than try to. That's true of all human interaction, right? I don't tell you my entire backstory when I gave you that little cliff note narrative about myself. I'm influencing you with facts, but I'm leaving out that I went to school at West Virginia University, because maybe that is just irrelevant. Maybe that might shade somebody's opinion. If they're from Pitt, for instance, they might not listen to what I have to say. So every time that we as humans communicate, we do bias the way that we're describing things. Misinformation, there's several different types. I mean, you can selectively omit things, but you can also, and we see it quite a bit with the way that the Russians are using it. They will simplify an argument and then will drag us down into baser arguments where it's in almost every argument, particularly complex matters of policy. There's a ton of things that it's rare that just one side has the full correct of it. But when you can drill it down into us versus them on any given issue, then it doesn't matter if you only agree with 40% of my message. You're now committed to 100% of what I have to say. Just because we've turned it into an us versus them scenario. Misinformation does a lot of that. Misinformation is also, you find there's three types of messaging in a certain context. We call them black, white, and gray. White messaging is when I'm Jonathan Nichols. You know this message is coming from me. I'm never going to lie. Usually the Russians are smart enough not to, though they've been misstepping on that lately. I'm not going to put out intentionally deceptive information over white because my credibility is at stake. I don't want anybody to, particularly when I'm in uniform, right? I've got the badge of the United States when I'm in uniform and I'm walking up to somebody. I need to make sure that every single time the United States says something, you believe that to be true. So that way, when we do things like in the when we took back Fallujah from Al Qaeda, we dropped leaflets that said, "Hey, we're coming tomorrow. If you want to stay and fight, stay and fight. But the Marines are coming in tomorrow." I need the audience to believe that. There needs to be no question at all. So I will never conduct a operation that has any measure of deceptiveness if I'm wearing the hat of the United States. And you see that is also true online to a large part, at least for the US. Again, not so much for the Russians these days with the Ukrainian stuff going on. But so the other types are gray, which is much like when I have a sock puppet. I might be communicating a message. I'll be communicating a message that maybe I don't want attributed back to me. So I'll use a sock puppet to communicate that message.
Let's define that for our audience who may not know.
So a sock puppet being a non-attributable source. So a Twitter account that I might have that doesn't explicitly have my name on it, that would be a sock puppet.
Okay.
You have no idea quite who I am, who is behind that screen name. That would be an instance of gray PSYOP using a Twitter sock puppet. A black PSYOP is when I'm intentionally being deceptive, and that is when I'm most likely to lie. I will, to use the sock puppet example, I'll use an account that is falsely attributed to somebody else. Say I want to pretend to be a pastor in your local school district area, and I really have an issue with the superintendent. I don't actually at all, but I want you to believe that his mask policy is bullshit. So I'll create an account pretending to be a pastor who's concerned about the superintendent's mask policy in order to generate a fake message.
Mm-hmm.
That is black PSYOP, and you don't always have to lie using black PSYOP, but it's when you're intentionally deceiving who the messenger is. The misinformation comes in, is the message itself truthful or not? And oftentimes.
So to prepare for such operations, are these accounts that they have instantly created, or would someone seed these accounts for a long period of time, allow them to build up trust in the community or karma in the Reddit page, or however you want to look at it?
Certainly, the most credible ones have try to have a long-standing, regular interaction with the community, and they'll do karma farming on Twitter, on Reddit specifically, so that they have that credibility within the communities built up, so that when it comes time to disrupt and degrade, they can do it. You saw the same with Twitter with some of the major conservative accounts. The TNGOP account was actually an Internet Research Agency account, and that was one of the most massive conservative accounts on Twitter. Not to pick on conservatives exclusively, there were quite a bit of LGBTQ community members who were actually Russian puppets at the time of the 2016 election. So it wasn't just one side or the other that fell for it. We kind of all did.
Oh, so to kind of seed that doubt and to create that mistrust in the institution of our nation, they kind of played all sides against each other.
Yeah. So according to Director Clapper, who was director of CIA for a while, as well as some other major positions high up, the three objectives in 2016 were to cast doubt in the U.S. electoral process writ large, to reduce confidence in Hillary Clinton as a leader, and then to increase support for Donald Trump. And so a lot of that, I'm sure we saw a good bit at the time where Bernie Sanders supporters just completely dropped out in much larger frequency than we've seen otherwise. They didn't get with the bandwagon of the Democratic Party, which is, some of that is truthful what those people felt, and I'm sure no single individual will say that they were psyoped into doing so. But the data shows that it happened in such incredibly large numbers, and a lot of them did flip over to Trump. And we have evidence. We have the messages. You can go back and find all the Internet Research Agency posts that were given to this House Select Intelligence Committee that are public knowledge. You can see that the Russians paid for ads using these accounts in rubles to target people like LGBT supporters of Bernie Sanders, to get them to hate Clinton so much that they would not flip over. Yeah, so it happened to all sides, and it will happen to all sides in every instance. Nobody should think that their side of any given debate is immune to this type of activity.
So how would one potentially even know if they're being psyoped?
I would suggest that everybody make sure to check their sources before posting things, particularly when we're looking at things like what's going on in Ukraine right now. I don't know about you, but I definitely fell for a couple instances this time around, and I'm trained in this. I really fully thought that Pornhub blocked Russians from watching porn in support of Ukraine. Turned out that was pro-Ukrainian propaganda that I fell for because I wanted to believe it. So look, fact check everywhere you can, and that's just a fun example. But on all sides, there's going to be people that are going to try to control the narrative. Ukrainians did a great job of controlling the narrative this time. I happen to agree with the narrative, and so it works out for where my biases are. But you should be aware that even your side is doing it. So the Russians are just bad at it this time around.
Yeah. So, for example, if your cause was, say, pro energy generated in the U.S. and you were trying to seed misinformation,
I'm a West Virginian. I'm right here for it.
Exactly. So, if that was your cause, someone might sow misinformation by overstating the facts or understating the facts. Is that how they would go about doing it?
Yeah, absolutely. I could tell you that there's a lot of anti-coal rhetoric that is just absolutely bunk. Even though I'm all for clean energy, don't get me wrong, but that's a different topic. That's a little close to home.
Sorry about that. I'm just trying to think because Russia is a huge exporter of fuel, of
Sure.
oil. So their manipulation of production will affect our bottom line. So they might go, well, let's just produce in the U.S. and or not produce in the U.S. and you need us for your oil.
Oh, certainly. I wouldn't be surprised if there was attempts to run campaigns that get us to fight ourselves over whether we should produce any energy in the U.S. I'm sure Russia would probably, if I were a Russian propagandist, putting myself in their shoes right now on that specific issue, I would be pushing for. I would be making the fight everywhere that the U.S. should adopt energy solutions that are 40 years out. So the cleanest energy is fusion. We better do that. And I'd be having my sock puppet saying that shit so that we're still stuck on the Russian oil teat for the next 40 years because that would support Russia's short-term security goals. So that would be an instance where that might be something you're doing they're doing without us even thinking about. I have no evidence of that. That's just a concept. I could see how that would happen.
Yes. So this show is focused on individuals breaking into cybersecurity. So if we were to apply the concepts of OSINT or open source information, how would we go about potentially validating information to ensure that who says it is really who says it? How deep would you dig if you were trying to find out if a source were valid or not? And how would you go about it?
Well, I'll tell you the very first thing I do is read an article before retweeting it or reposting it. That, for whatever reason, and I'm sure we're all guilty of it a little bit, that's just the biggest thing that we really need to do. Actually read the damn thing before you retweet it. Too many people get caught out appearing to support things they had no idea they supported because they appear to support because they didn't read the article they retweeted. So before you post anything, make sure you read what you're posting to make sure that you fully agree with it and not just the headline that you saw. Second, make sure that when you're posting from as credible a source as possible. It's always fun to be at the at the root of things, to be the first one to pull it from the dredges of Reddit or the Discord channels or wherever the kids are talking these days. I found it on TikTok. I don't know. And post that to a larger audience. But make sure, one, be as close to the source as possible, and two, get as when you're not as close to the initial source as possible, so you can't call up the hacker who did the vulnerability and can't independently test a vulnerability in the space. Try to get validation from 2 or 3 other sources. In any instance, when you're reposting an article, just make sure to, the same way when you're writing a report, make sure that your bibliography is covered before you make any claims that you can't validate. Otherwise, you're just part of the problem.
I mean, that goes against the heart of being human, right? You just want the easy way out. And how dare I find 3 people to validate a source before I post it on social media?
I wish people treated it more like Wikipedia, where you're going to get in trouble if you don't. If someone's going to come by and clean up your edit if you don't source it. So drop a source. And make sure that your sources are credible, or you're going to be in trouble. You end up accidentally appearing to support things you had no idea that you supported, or saying shit that's absolutely wrong, stuff that's absolutely wrong. I'm sorry.
That's okay. We tell YouTube that this show's not made for kids just for that reason.
Right
on. So we talked about a variety of different topics. Anything we missed that you wanted to cover about misinformation that we haven't discussed yet?
Let's see. Go through my notes here. Touched on it a little bit, but I want to highlight that some groups have gone through and done significant research on. Actually, let's just start with some of the resources I use when I'm looking at disinformation in spaces that I'm not already. I was super focused on Iraq and Afghanistan for a good bit of my career. When I'm looking for resources, people who dedicate their lives to misinformation at a broader strategic level, I find DFR Labs, that's Delta Foxtrot Romeo, DFR Lab from the Atlantic Council is a really good source. I also find that Bellingcat, all one word, cat meow, belling like a bell, the act of bell, I don't know, ding, 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 Bellingcat, all one word. They also have a lot of really good stuff going on. There's a few others out there, but I haven't vetted them all independently. So those are the 2 that I can stand by and say that I personally trust, and would post a link after reading the article without too much additional validation. So from people like that, we find that when trolls ingest themselves in discussion, there's what's the term in the internet? There's a law. I forget what it is, but anybody who says Nazi loses the argument, or every discussion on the internet will eventually devolve into somebody being a Nazi. And the first person to do that automatically loses. I forget what the rule is. You know what I'm talking about, right?
No, I haven't heard that rule before, but I'm sure
going to say it.
In propaganda theory, that could be true. I'll have to take the expert's opinion for it.
I'll find it for you. It's not so much a propaganda thing; it's an old school internet thing. But so as the Russian trolls got into these Reddit threads or these Twitter threads, they intentionally worked to simplify the argument to 2 sides. So that's a measure of cognitive complexity is the term that the researchers I'm referencing used. And the cognitive complexity is the concept that 2 sides, that not all, or that the complex topics are not 2-sided. The reduction
clean energy has many sides to it.
Right, reduction in cognitive complexity is turning an argument into an us versus them. It's either heads or tails. It cannot be shades of gray, right? So clean energy is a perfect example of that. Which is why I'm not touching it. there is also an increase in identity attacks. There's more people telling somebody that they're an idiot because they believe something, and this noticeably goes up when misinformation actors get involved in these discussions. There's a significant increase in the toxicity, just the general use of negative terms when you do taxonomy of negative words, and because I'm not going to read every single post in Reddit, but I will have my AI do it, and it'll be like, man, these people are really pissed off. They're saying a whole bunch of negative words. So the toxicity goes up, identity attacks go up, and the ability for the arguments complexity goes down when we see these trolls engage. So watch out for that, and do your best as an audience to add nuance to conversations, de-escalate the rhetoric. The thing that's toxic to the trolls is to have those complex discussions, to add that complexity, and just be kind and loving to people you disagree with. The best way to beat trolls is to be loving and kind, and to check your damn sources. You do those things, you're doing great.
So, here's a question. I just thought about it. Do you think that they break down the complexity because there's a language barrier, or you're more than familiar with the language and you're purposefully doing that?
I'm sure it's purposeful. There's an obvious intent to make this simple. I mean, I'm sure it makes it easier to recruit lesser people who are less fluent in English. It doesn't take a rocket surgeon to say Clinton is evil.
Yes, our audience is saying check your sources. Yes,
absolutely, Dorian. Absolutely.
So we have a couple minutes left. Any last parting words? If actually someone wanted to say follow your career or a similar career into information warfare and disinformation, how would one go about doing that?
Sure. I would again look at fellowships at places like DFR Labs. I know that they have a student internship program. There's no college course for disinformation, at least not that I know of. Maybe there's a new one out of Columbia that's come up in the last couple of years. But to my knowledge, there's no dedicated course on this stuff. So identifying where you can get it. Find those internships at DFR Labs. Find those internships at Bellingcat to get into disinformation stuff. And your use of what's called human sourcing. What do you call it in hacking? I forget.
Human?
No, not human. That's a military term.
Well, in cybersecurity, we call it OSINT, which is open source information.
Well, your OSINT stuff is always good, and make sure that that's just check your sources stuff. But hacking humans, there's a freaking term for it. That would be the closest thing. Social engineering. Social engineering is the closest infosec thing to psychological operations. I would say that as somebody who has a cybersecurity career and a misinformation career, I have found it most useful when trying to figure out what the humans behind the keyboards are doing. We're not doing the infosec career just to create firewall rules or Yara rules or snort scripts. Where ultimately what we're trying to do is we're trying to stop bad people from hurting good people, and that's why it's a noble career field. And so oftentimes I find that people in infosec get so caught up in the individual rules or the individual vulnerability, and that's perfectly good, but why are the people doing it? Think about the Eastern European actor that is conducting the ransomware campaign. What alternatives do they really have? They can make a couple $100,000 a month doing this with no real repercussions. Or if you want them to have a legitimate career, where are they supposed to go? They don't have access to anything. It's $300 a month, maybe if they're lucky, a good paying job in their hometowns. We so often pay attention to the bits and the bytes and not the people behind the keyboard. And I think a lot more focus needs to be paid on who the bad actors are. Yeah, what they're doing. Sure, we need to understand their tactics, techniques, and procedures. But the why they are doing it is super important, and I find is often missing in the InfoSec narrative.
Wow. Well, John, thank you very much for coming on and sharing this useful information. Truly appreciate it. And so, for everyone that's following us on LinkedIn, follow myself and John. For those of you on YouTube, hit subscribe and then that notification button. And for those of you on podcast, feel free to share this with everyone that's interested in cybersecurity or misinformation today. Thank you very much.